The Liberation of Sundrian City by Andrew Lewis. Chapter 23. Cut Out. Did you hear? He had heard, several times. It was all that he had heard. From the moment he set foot in the dining hall that morning, he sensed something big had happened. He felt it buzzing through the room. The atmosphere was electric with gossip, and it was mere seconds until the news that the princess had made an attempt at taking her father's life reached him. He took the news with him to his table and sat with it in silence. He could simply not believe that the princess had gone through with an attempt to kill her father. And now she sat in the dungeons awaiting execution. It was too much to comprehend. It was too much entirely. It didn't make sense. There were so many questions he had to ask. Questions that simply added to the mountain he already sat upon. His life seemed to be nothing more than the mere accumulation of overwhelming questions. He had so been looking forward to meeting with the princess that evening, and felt saddened that he would not be meeting her at the glasshouse that night, nor would he ever be meeting with her again. She would be dead within the next few days. That was a truth that he wasn't yet able to ingest. It seemed unreal, too mad to be real life. He ran it through his mind over and over, and each time it inflicted more and more devastation, until he was left with the realization that he had harbored secret intentions to one day wed the princess of Sundrian City, and that his secret ambition had now been thwarted because his only true love was now set to die by the crash of an elephant's foot upon her head. No, this couldn't be true. It simply couldn't. He had to speak to Emperor Frigg. There was no question about it, and so he decided that before the day's training was to commence, he would head straight to the higher quarters of the palace and search for the Emperor. Linus wondered if he might be found in his sunroom or perhaps in the baths. Either way, it wouldn't take Linus too long to find him, he was sure of that. And once he had found him, it would be a simple case of changing the Emperor's mind, making him be reasonable, rational, and ultimately merciful. Yes, it would be so simple as this, he was sure. When Deimos came into the room to announce the day's schedule, he was followed closely by High Lord Ramil and Goresh, and Linus was not surprised to see this, for he knew that Remy had returned from his expedition the night before, and expected that he would like to chime in on the topic that was currently buzzing about the palace. When Deimos completed his announcements, Remy stepped forward, thanking the commander as he did. Deimos dismissed the gesture entirely, making no response other than to move back and stand beside the wide wine barrels, giving Remy the floor. Before he spoke, he took a moment to scour the room with a sort of mournful gaze. "Men," he began, addressing the room with open arms, "we are faced today with a tragedy, a true tragedy. We have all heard the rumours by now, I am quite sure, and yes, it is true. It seems that the doubt that I spoke of several moons ago has spread as far as the palace and has evidently grasped our Princess Robin Frigg. She has been charged with treason and sent to the dungeon to await execution. I am so desperately sorry to say. But we cannot afford to allow those infected with this doubt to live, for their doubt weakens the defences of our wall to the vile creatures that dwell out there in the world. Men, there can be no doubt among us. Or I assure you our walls will crumble, and that outside horrors will be let into our city to do as they please, and this would be a fate worse than death for us. Good day to you all, and be strong." He nodded with a lamentation that Linus suspected was feigned, and took his leave. The end of Remy's speech triggered a bustling among the room, and Commander Deimos chose this moment to leave the room too. If there was any doubt that the rumours were false, that was now quashed. Linus sat back and allowed his head to spin with the news for a few moments, until a jolt set him on his feet and trailing after Remy and Goresh at speed. "Remy, wait!" He spun on his heels, his manner was curt. Linus was disappointed to see that Deimos had stopped too. "What is it, Linus?" "I need to see Emperor Frigg," he announced. There was a moment of thought that flashed on Remy's expression, and he turned to Deimos as if to find a hint. "Very good," he answered finally. "As it happens, the Emperor needs to see you too." Linus searched their faces for a clue as to why, but found none. Deimos seemed pleased with the response, although there were no ostensible signs of it. It was merely deducible from his lack of scorn at the suggestion. Remy, on the other hand, offered a brief smile, saying, "Come with us," and turning to follow the hall. As he turned, Linus thought he detected a hint of bother in the expression on Remy's face. "Linus, my boy." The same bothered smile was right there on the Emperor's face as he poured the last few drops into his wineglass. "How rude of me to take the last of this," he said, seemingly more to himself than his audience. Linus scoured the room, and the looks on the faces were again untelling. Deimos, stern as usual. Remy, a little jittery, doing his best polite smile possible. "Servant, pull another cork, would you?" The words were thrown carelessly over his shoulder to no one in particular, but nonetheless someone jumped on the task immediately. "Remy," he offered. Remy shook his head. "Deimos, old chum, I suppose I can't tempt you?" "Thank you, sir," he declined. "Just you and I then, Linus, I guess." And with that he waved his hands about as if to gesture this to the servant. It was at this moment that something rather unexpected happened. Goresh, who stood behind Remy, stepped to the table and slid forward Remy's cup. A small ripple of shock made its way across the seated, mostly from Remy. "Goresh, what, It's quite all right, Remy," Frigg laughed. "Rude of me not to offer." He pointed the servant to the cup with a little much enthusiasm. "So what's this all about?" asked Frigg. An embarrassed sort of look crossed Remy's face as he glanced fleetingly at Linus. He had told Linus that the Emperor needed to see him, and now it seemed that Frigg knew nothing about this. The confusion was plain to see on Linus's face, but Remy began talking before Linus could bring his question to voice. "Well, sir, it's come to my attention. Well, Deimos is determined. How to explain?" He was babbling. "Out with it, then." "Sir, as you know, Princess Robin is to be executed at tomorrow's rest day show." "Yes, of course I know. What is—" "Sir, the draw. It's Linus." All eyes swung to meet him, a look of suppressed horror in all but Deimos's. The moment lingered a little too long for comfort, and Linus had to break it. "What does that mean?" Looks were exchanged, as if Remy and Frigg were passing a buck between them. "It means, Linus," it was Deimos who spoke, "that it is your turn to ride the elephant at the show. It means that you will be the one to execute Princess Robin." "But surely," Remy began. "The selection, of course, can be changed, with your word, Emperor." "But we have never broken this protocol, and it is my preference to keep it that way, of course," Deimos cut in. Remy gave a "what would I know" sort of shrug, waving his hand disparagingly, and in that moment of impasse, the attention of the room moved to Frigg, the man who would ultimately make the decision. He sat staring into his glass, thinking hard, or perhaps not thinking at all. Then, in unison, 3 glasses of wine were raised dreamily to the faces of Frigg, Goresh, and Linus. It was one of those moments that undeniably called for wine. "Linus, I will give you the choice," he finally muttered. "If you agree, we will stick to the draw as planned, and you can have the honour of riding in the rest day show. My daughter is guilty of treason and attempting murder, and as such I've ruled her death to be more than fair, as much as it breaks my heart. I suppose it doesn't matter who does it really, but I would rather have a rider I know and trust do the work. However, if you do not believe you can handle this responsibility, I will understand. It is unfortunate that there is not much time to dwell on this, Linus, so please tell us now." To be put on a spot like this made the decision blur into a million questions, too many to discern a single one. The room fell silent, and the moment drew on. Wine glasses remained still. Linus wanted to say no, he wouldn't be the rider. He wanted dearly to, but only as an attempt to spare the princess. All thoughts of begging for her life had left him now. He could see there was no point. "I'll do it," he whispered. No one moved. "Very well. Linus stood and left the room, while the others sat in silence.